Drug and alcohol addiction are major health problems in the United States these days, and it crosses all demographics, from the wealthy who seem to have everything to the poor and the homeless. Why is it such a problem, and what can we do about it? To answer those questions, we need to find out just what addiction and substance abuse are. Ryan LaLumiere is professor in the psychology department at the University of Iowa and a specialist in the neurobiology of addiction. He says that addiction is a complex condition.
Addiction really involves three basic characteristics with regard to drugs of abuse. One is a compulsion to seek and take the drug. The second is a loss of control over the use of the drug. And the third component is a negative emotional state when you cannot access the drug. And together, those three characteristics really help to define drug addiction.
He says that there is a genetic component to the disease of addiction as well.
There have been a number of studies that have, especially, for example, twin studies that look at what we call the heritability component. And there is a significant heritability component to drug addiction. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's specific to a particular class of drugs. It appears from most of the studies that it cuts across classes of drugs of abuse. So there is good evidence, in fact, that genetics does play a role in whether you are likely, A, to start taking a drug of abuse, and B, become addicted to that drug. Now, at the same time, it's also important to know that there are significant environmental factors, social factors, cultural factors that may also play a role in both the initiation of drug use as well as drug addiction.
LaLumiere says that there is also a link between other psychiatric disorders and addiction.
There is a great deal of what we call comorbidity between addiction and a number of other psychiatric disorders, including bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety disorders. So what he is describing is actually quite common and is a major impediment in the treatment of drug addiction as well, because you don't need to just treat the addiction, but you also need to deal with the other disorders that the person may have.
LaLumiere says that people who have a family history of substance abuse or those with a psychiatric disorder don't necessarily become abusers themselves. There are outside factors that can cause a person to turn to drugs or alcohol to self-medicate.
There's been a tremendous amount of research looking at the interactions between stress and drug addiction and showing there's a big relationship there in a number of different ways. We know that, for example, chronic stress early in life can alter the brain systems that are involved in reward and may make you more susceptible to drug addiction. They can also make you relapse back to drug addiction. So people who had been drug addicts and were trying to stay clean, stressors in their lives can precipitate them to go back to using drugs. So just as one example, stress absolutely plays a huge role. So when we talk about these other kinds of factors, there can be both chronic factors, psychiatric disorders, but also acute factors going on in a person's life that will influence both the development of addiction as well as their potential relapse back to using the drugs.
The combination of heredity, a psychiatric disorder, and the disease of substance abuse itself is what plagued Bob Allison. He's a recovering abuser and author of the book Saved by the Prince of Peace, Dungeon to Sky. Allison says his story is one of long-term drug and alcohol abuse that led him into the depths of darkness.
I was living in a utility closet, electrical closet, in an alley behind my favorite bar. I could open a door with a plastic comb. When I stepped inside, I could lock that door with a push button on the doorknob. That was prime real estate when you're homeless. At the end of my journey, I was so beat up physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. I had already had pancreatitis. I was very weak. I was terrified. I could feel death breathing down the back of my neck. People were dying around me. They were killing homeless people in Denver at that time. And I was actually attacked by a man with 2 butcher knives when I was sleeping down at the river with my dog.
Allison had been to 13 treatment centers for his addictions, but nothing worked until he hit bottom.
I'm in that closet. I wake up one morning. I'm feeling overwhelmed and terrified. And I say one single prayer: Jesus, please help me. 2 or 3 days later, I'm sitting in Hazelden Foundation, one of the top chemical dependency treatment centers in the country. And I'm sitting with a group of 25 other addicts sitting in a circle talking about our experiences. And to me, that was a major, major miracle. My family helped me get from homelessness in Denver to Minnesota to go to treatment. I agreed, as part of my surrender, to go to 9 months of treatment. And believe me, I needed it. I was in such bad shape. I was on the edge of death. and my health was terrible.
Allison credits his sobriety to Jesus and the help of his family in getting him to that final rehab center. He says that part of the problem with his continued addiction was that he had a dual diagnosis that wasn't addressed.
What that means is, in my case, I was an alcoholic and an addict, but I was also manic depressive. I was first diagnosed in 1982, but I was in denial, did not accept that I had a mental illness. So that's one of the reasons why I went to 13 treatment centers. I could not stay sober because of the mania in my life. So if you have a dual diagnosis, it's really key to get treatment for both conditions, both the addiction and the mental illness.
Many people who have alcohol abuse problems and drink throughout the day can function quite well in their daily lives. Sometimes no one outside the family even knows that they're alcoholics. Ryan LaLumiere says that for these individuals, it's a matter of building up a tolerance to drink.
We know that people who are chronic alcohol drinkers can metabolize alcohol a bit more quickly, but also their brains show less responsiveness to it. And this is actually part of the problem with addiction, because what ends up happening is that in order to achieve the same level of intoxication, they have to consume more. So it actually helps to progress the whole process of addiction. So some of these people, quite frankly, have probably been able to become tolerant to some of the alcohol and are able to work around some of the negative effects. Nonetheless, if somebody were drinking to get up in the morning, as well as a few drinks during the day, if we were to measure them, a number of characteristics of these people compared to normal control subjects, we'd see that these people were in fact impaired in a number of ways, even if they are able to maintain some level of basic functioning.
Bob Allison is worried about the slow spread of the tolerance for and legalization of marijuana. He says that it's a gateway to more severe problems in the future.
I feel very strongly about this because, I'm a recovering addict of 16 years. And for me, in my story, that started with marijuana in high school, it absolutely was a gateway drug. Now, everyone handles chemicals differently, but I can tell you this whole legalization of marijuana, I think it's a big, big mistake.
The idea of gateway drugs has been studied, and LaLumiere says that there's no evidence so far that shows a link.
There's been a lot of research looking at the idea of the gateway hypothesis. And the idea, of course, the gateway hypothesis is that the use of one drug then actually makes you more likely to become addicted to other drugs. And the research on that hypothesis suggests that is not the case. Rather, what people believe is, and what the evidence suggests, is that there's something called a common addiction liability. That is, it doesn't matter what drug you start taking first, just that certain people have predispositions to using drugs and to becoming addicted to drugs, regardless of the class of drugs.
No matter what the substance that's abused is, why is it that some people can reach sobriety and others can't? Allison says it's often a case of the addict losing hope that he or she will ever be able to stop. Isolation from others is also a factor.
A man or woman might be living alone in a lonely apartment someplace, going to work. They might be a functional alcoholic. They do great at work. They're a super hard worker. So this person comes home to their lonely apartment and they drink themselves half to death until 5 o'clock in the morning, and then they get up the next day and they go to work. And they repeat that cycle. So that's a lifestyle change that needs to be changed. Isolation. We need friends. We need to be loved. We need physical exercise. We need to have a good nutrition plan.
The support of family and friends is important for many addicts seeking help. But LaLumiere says that it's ultimately up to the substance abuser to make the decision.
Because so much of it depends on the individual and depends on their willingness to accept whether they have a problem or not. It's very difficult to reach somebody who does not acknowledge that they are having a drug addiction. So I think that when it comes to families and friends, one of the things that you want to do, of course, is to make sure that you don't continue to enable the drug addiction and to provide that kind of both firm and loving support for the person. But at the end of the day, it's very difficult for other people to solve this person's problem. And I think that's an important lesson for family and friends to remember, is that they cannot solve the problem for the person. If the person isn't willing to be a participant in the treatment, they're not going to have a great deal of effectiveness when treating them.
So what are the best treatments for people addicted to drugs or alcohol? It's hard to say, since everyone is different. LaLumiere says that one key to success is providing treatment that supports the addict for the long term.
This is a fundamental problem that we have in addiction treatment, that we don't have a lot of good, effective treatments. We have a lot of what we call cognitive behavioral therapy-based treatments, where we put people in the rehab, we get them clean, we try to talk with them about the issues that were leading to their drug use and why drug use is problematic, and we can certainly get people to be clean for a month, 2 months, get them past any withdrawal symptoms, but the fundamental problem is that we face a very high rate of relapse. If you follow people up to 6 months later, 12 months later, a large percentage of them, and this is across all the drugs of abuse, a large percentage of them relapse back to their drug use. And we certainly don't have any single treatment that works across all the drugs of abuse. We have a number of treatments, of course, for example, opiate addiction, such as methadone. But none of these are magic bullets. None of these have tremendously high rates of effectiveness. The best treatments really combine as many possible modes of treatment as we can and provide long-term support for people.
To learn more about this topic and our guests Ryan LaLumiere and Bob Allison, visit viewpointsradio.org. For more behind the scenes, follow Viewpoints Radio on Twitter and Instagram. This segment is written and produced by Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
2019 was a year of important discoveries about Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. Making news this year, researchers learned that Alzheimer's risk genes are different in men and women. This could help explain why 2/3 of people living with Alzheimer's are women. Other studies in 2019 found that vision and hearing loss may increase dementia risk, especially when both sensory impairments are present. There are also new discoveries about lifestyle, according to Dr. Keith Fargo, Director of Scientific Programs and Outreach at the Alzheimer's Association.
A healthy diet and regular exercise are good for your overall physical health, but researchers have also found that they can reduce your risk for cognitive decline and dementia. These healthy habits, along with things like cognitive stimulation, may even help people who are at high risk due to their genes.
Researchers say a simple blood test to detect Alzheimer's earlier is on the horizon, and 2 recent announcements have increased hope for new Alzheimer's drug treatments. To learn more about Alzheimer's research and how you can participate, visit alz.org.
What are you going to do with your old car? You can try selling it, you could junk it, or you can donate it to Heritage for the Blind. Your car will be towed away for free, and your donation is tax deductible. Just call 1-800-835-1478. Heritage for the Blind accepts cars, vans, trucks, and boats. It doesn't matter if your vehicle runs or not. It will be towed away for free, and you'll be supporting those that need help. Heritage for the Blind is a nonprofit organization that helps the visually impaired live fuller lives. Call right now to donate your car, and as a special thank you, you'll receive a free 3-day vacation voucher to over 50 locations. Call Heritage for the Blind right now. Call 1-800-835-1478. Donating is easy, and your vehicle is towed away for free. Plus, you'll get a free vacation voucher for donating. Call now, 1-800-835-1478. That's 1-800-835-1478.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows. And find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.